Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Wheeler Centre. My name is Margaret Simons. I'm a journalist with a particular interest in writing on media. But my function here tonight is to welcome Barbara Gunnell, who is a writer and editor based in London. She's been assistant editor of The Independent on Sunday and comment editor of The Observer, and associate editor of The New Statesman. She's a past president of the National Union of Journalists in the UK and is currently a contributor to The Observer. And the reason she's here tonight is because she's written a fascinating essay about the Wikileaks phenomenon and Julian Assange called Rebel, Public Nuisance and Dreamer, three headings which by themselves are individually fascinating, in the current issue of Griffith Review, which I have with me here. Now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to have a chat to Barbara, and we'll talk about some of the issues raised by what I think we agree is one of the most significant events for a long while, and probably what will be one of the landmark events of this century. And then at some point I will throw it open to questions from the floor, so be ready for that. There will be ushers with microphones available, and of course we'll be wrapping up by 7:15. Barbara, can you tell me how and why did you get interested in this?
Well, because I'm a journalist. I think it would have been impossible for any journalist not to become increasingly interested in the Wikileaks story throughout 2010. As more and more major revelations came to light. And I think earlier in the year, around about May, June, came that astonishing leak of a film taken from an Apache helicopter in Iran, which showed that there had been a pretty brutal killing of some Iraqi civilians, including two Reuters journalists. And just the fact that had been leaked seemed to journalists, it was just the talk of everyone. This was sort of followed by the Iraq war logs, the Afghanistan war logs. No journalist has ever had hold of the war logs of an ongoing war. So it really became more and more astonishing. And then I suppose, finally the cable leaks. Just a sensational number of stories that arose from that. And we've only so far had about 5% of those diplomatic cables. So really, it was just a game-changing series of events, which, as a journalist, Margaret, you know, was irresistible.
Well, I think most journalists react with a bit of envy, as well, apart from anything else.
There's certainly a lot of that, yes.
Now, your essay begins with an account of Assange's trial. Can you tell us a little bit about that, what it was like to see the man on trial?
Yeah, just to put that a tiny bit in context, what happened almost sort of at the same time as these astonishing sort of stories and leaks were coming to light, was that Assange, Julian Assange, who was in Sweden, doing his normal work of campaigning and getting contacts for newspapers for people to cooperate with on these leaks, and he was accused of sexual assault on two women. Now, none of us know. This has not been put to trial yet at all, so none of us really know what happened. And so I certainly don't want to talk about that because it's a case that has yet to be heard. But he was in England when the charges became known, and that as a result of that, an extradition order was needed, and he and his lawyers have resisted the extradition order, and the trial was a slightly technical but very, very interesting 3-day trial, which was challenging the European arrest warrant. And so that was the purpose of the trial, slightly technical, but obviously very interesting in the political context in which it happened, yeah.
Now, you make the point in your essay that a great deal of the publicity and I suppose the hostility has focused on the person of Assange himself. Mm-hmm. And you raised the question, would WikiLeaks have been invented anyway? Was it going to happen anyway? Or did it take a Julian Assange to do it?
Well, no, I think that's a fascinating question, and you know, one has to come to one's own conclusions. I mean, one of the things I'd say about, I suppose my core belief is that a very exceptional sort of set of circumstances came together. One of them was Assange himself, who's obviously a very, very gifted sort of computer coder, etc. So highly technically skilled person. That came together with also a quite strong political passion and a determination to uncover injustice. And the sort of marriage of these two things, I think, sort of led him to use the skills he's got to achieve that. Would it have happened without him? And the most ungenerous response I've heard to that came from Bill Keller, the editor of the New York Times. And he sort of said, having benefited quite considerably from the WikiLeaks, he withdrew a bit from, I suppose, the political presentation of Assange, and said that it would have happened anyway. The internet had become a very important force in journalism, and so it was going to happen. And I think that, in a way, I think that slightly misses the point. And I don't know if any of you saw the film Social Network, which is about Mark Zuckerberg's Facebook. And there's a wonderful moment in that when, because the Winklevoss brothers, this is a true story, but I'm talking about the film, the Winklevoss brothers were fighting for the right to for their share of Facebook, because they said they invented it. And Zuckerberg, who is still the owner of Facebook, said, well, if you could have invented Facebook, you would have invented Facebook. And I think that in a way that's the answer to WikiLeaks. I mean, it's very easy to think in retrospect that, anyone could have done it, or it's just a site which enables you to sort of dump secrets and then we decode them. But of course, I mean, why didn't the big newspapers do it if it's so easy?
That was my next question. Why didn't the New York Times or the Guardian or the Washington Post or one of these big media institutions, why didn't they do it? And could they do it?
Yes, well, it's like I say, it looks easy, but it obviously isn't. The Wall Street Journal is just sort of said that it has opened a site. I forget the name now, but anyway, they have opened a site for people to present their, to come with their, for whistleblowers specifically, who think that they have something important to release for the greater good. But it has a disclaimer on the front which sort of says that we can't guarantee to sort of keep your secrets. We can't guarantee not to reveal who you are, and especially if it's against the law. And of course, this is a complete travesty of the whole idea of WikiLeaks, which is that it was meant to supply a safe haven for whistleblowers who felt that they really did have something, some important sort of secret to reveal for the public good.
Well, that's sort of a whole interesting thing, isn't it? These media institutions can't be seen to be in breach of the law, whereas WikiLeaks perhaps can be.
Yes.
Have journalists become too much of insiders?
Well, yes. I mean, I think that is a problem. But I mean, journalists do break the law, and I know. Sometimes they break it in a way that one would applaud, and sometimes they break it in a way that one wouldn't feel quite so happy with. But if, for example, there's a court order on a paper to reveal the source of a secret story, then, journalists have gone to prison. I mean, an ethical journalist would say, no, I will never reveal a source. And so in a way, you're defying the law, if not breaking the law. And I think, Margaret, you've said yourself in some of your writings, actually there are situations in which journalists probably do have to defy the law. It depends on the law that you're working with, but
Is Assange a journalist?
Well, I mean, to my mind, he's absolutely a journalist. Again, I mean, there's a slightly sort of technical reason why this question comes up so often, but I think it's a very interesting one, and that is that if I mean, again, the New York Times and some other newspapers have denied that he is a journalist. But if he isn't a journalist, he's denied the protection, particularly, I mean, if he is ever extradited to the States, or he's denied the very, very strong protection that journalists are given in that country. I mean, certainly stronger than in my country, and I think stronger than in your country. And so it's really, I mean, it's practically a matter of importance to say that he's a journalist. But actually, anyway, I think that people who deny he's a journalist are slightly sort of barking up the wrong tree, because journalism isn't all about writing and fine words and being an investigative journalist. I mean, you know, when you read the papers, I mean, journalism has many sort of facets. It's data organisation. It's I mean, there are many, many different things that journalists do. But I mean, specifically, when you look at, for example, Collateral Murder, which was the name of the video that Julian Assange made of the Apache helicopter killings. He called it collateral murder. Well, that's a very tendentious headline. I mean, he's calling it murder. That's right or wrong. That's a journalistic interpretation. It's edited. It has some music in. It has, you know, there's many things about it which make it a journalistic project rather than a simple sort of straightforward sort of release of data. So, yeah, he's definitely a journalist.
So it's not only raw information, it's curated to an extent, the WikiLeaks material?
No, I mean, he has, I mean, this is slightly sort of debated territory, really, but, I mean, he's a proponent of what he calls scientific journalism. And he has quite a low opinion, and one might say, with in some respects, with good reason, of journalists. And he says that what journalists should be doing is providing raw information, not processed, interpreted material. And I would say to that, really, that everything that you read in a paper, however sort of straightforward and factual it seems, has to be interpreted in some way. I think that if you opened your paper or turned on your televisions tomorrow and saw only raw data, you know, unprocessed. I mean, supposing, for example, there's a general election here, and you get the paper and all it has is the results, constituency by constituency, and you have to read the paper before you can put a headline on it saying landslide victory or something. So, I mean, of course, it's processed. So I think that the idea that you can have unprocessed information is just wrong.
Yes, because storytelling is part of what we're used to doing as journalists, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And storytelling is also what Julian Assange is doing.
Yes.
In a way.
So curation to that extent, at least.
Indeed, yeah.
Yeah, and choosing when to release and what to release and so on.
Yeah.
But these days, of course, journalists who are employed by media organisations are not the only people doing that kind of thing. Is anybody here tweeting at the moment? Tweeting this function? Yes, a couple. Okay, so are they journalists?
Tweet on, yes. Well, you see, I would have said about, I don't know, about 6 months ago, I would have said they're not. That's not journalism. However, when I was actually at the Assange trial, there was a woman, a wonderful woman, if anyone wants to follow her tweet name is Federica Cocco, C-O-C-C-O, and she tweeted the whole of the Assange 3 days trial, and it was incredible. I mean, what an achievement. She, at the end of it, she sent me the transcripts of all these tweets, and the word count was 10,000 words, which anyone who, I mean, 10,000 words is Oh no, it was 40,000. It was 40,000 words. That's almost a book. It's half a novel. So I thought that was an amazing achievement. Now, as she was tweeting it, she was doing that in London. Someone in Paris was editing it and blogging it out at the same time. That's just an amazing achievement, I think.
I should ask, by the way, what the hashtag is in case anybody wants to join. No? Wikileaks WC. Okay, hashtag Wikileaks WC.
Wikileaks WC, I love
Those
it.
of you who are on Twitter will know what I'm talking about. Those of you who aren't won't have a clue. But anyway.
I mean, Twitter's made an enormous difference, hasn't it? I mean, I think that's
well, it has. And also in your essay, you talk about the impact, and you say this is quite undoubted, that the WikiLeaks releases was a major causal factor in the Middle Eastern uprisings and revolutions and so on. Can you tell us a little bit about that? What do you think? How does WikiLeaks to blame for that, if blame is the word, which is probably the wrong word?
Credit.
Credit for that, yes.
Okay, I mean, again, not everyone agrees with this, and I certainly wouldn't say that there weren't already the stirrings of rebellions and revolts in many Arab states at that time. But what I certainly think is that the release of the diplomatic cables, had a powerful impact in that region, and it's very. It seems to me quite difficult to deny. Imagine yourself, for example, as a Tunisian, and you're living under a really sort of, a corrupt regime, a vicious regime, a regime that sort of gives barely anybody any rights apart from the right to sort of work very, very hard for nothing. And so then you realise, you learn that the US ambassador to that country has, from the diplomatic cables release, you learn, has been writing to Washington that he also thinks that the regime there is corrupt, and that the ruling family is becoming more and more unpopular, and that soon there could well be a revolt there. Now, if you realise that the United States, which is actually the public story it's telling is that the Tunisian regime is a regime they can do business with, no particular problems, and the private story they're telling each other is that it's a regime rotten to the core, which deserves to be overthrown and probably soon will. And has the sound gone? No, it's back again. Then that would give you some courage, I think. If you were sort of, if you were on the edge, you would gain some strength from that. You would start talking to other people about it, and it would snowball. And that's what happened in Egypt, certainly, and it's what happened in Tunisia. So,
and the revolution itself proceeded with the help of Twitter and Facebook and so on, didn't it?
You could say that in Egypt. First of all, you had WikiLeaks to sort of to start spreading some good stories about what was being said. And you then had Facebook for people to start organising and sort of grouping around different ideas. And then you had Twitter, which absolutely was instrumental on the day. I have got some tweets from that, if that's all right, without knocking the microphone over. The hashtag, by the way, in Egypt was January the 25th, because that's when they started. And if anyone was watching at that time, you would have seen the tweets coming in so fast they were rolling down the screen like that. It was like a cine camera. The Guardian. Very soon afterwards published the tweets, a selection of tweets made on the 2nd of February, which was the day that in Cairo where they took Tahrir Square, when the protesters took Tahrir Square. And it's just fantastic. It's fantastic Traveller W tweets, I am seeing, not reporting, seeing Mubarak people throwing Molotov cocktails on demonstrators and on shops. Later on, the same day, G Square 86 says, I will not leave Tahrir tonight, so stop telling me to do so. We need more people in Tahrir now. Get here for our freedom. Then particular things, very tense near the museum now. We're still blocking them, but fatigue and injuries slowly catching up with us. More people needed. So they're calling all through the night for more people. And I don't know if you remember that it was about dawn when they actually sort of took the square and never left it after that, and that was the turning point. And then I think very, very movingly, really, at the end it says this one was at 6:20 in the morning. We're fighting on the bridge now. They don't exceed 100. The government troops don't exceed 100. We need to hold on for 30 more minutes. He was absolutely right. So I think things like that. That combination of new media, without question, I would say the Arab Spring would not be the Arab Spring it is had it not been for that combination. Yeah.
Well, it makes the hair stand up on the back of your neck, really, doesn't it, going through that kind of thing? But I mean, this is an extraordinary development, isn't it, that WikiLeaks is part of, this world awash with almost anybody being able to publish to the world. Yeah. I mean, what's it going to do to us?
To journalists, well, this is the big question, and I mean, it goes along with another big question, which you know the answers to much more than I do, Margaret, which is who is going to pay for words? I mean, that's the problem, because it's there's so far you can go with citizen journalism, and there's so far you can go with sort of new media leaks, that kind of communication. But in the end, investigative journalism is expensive, and we've got even for WikiLeaks it's expensive. When their funds were cut off, they were severely sort of handicapped by no funds. So that's a problem which I don't know how that's going to be resolved. I mean, I do feel optimistic. I mean, despite that, I do feel optimistic about journalism, because I think it's been re-energised by WikiLeaks and by other new media, and so there is an energy in journalism at the moment, and it's matched by an appetite in the public for the truth, which is a fantastic sort of thing, and the belief that the public can have the truth, and that gives the journalists energy to go out and find it. Yeah.
You talked earlier on about Assange's political sensibility, that he had that, and that was one of the things that led him to create WikiLeaks. So what are his politics? Is he an anarchist?
I don't think he is, actually, although a lot of his supporters are. I mean, it's in a way, it's not really for me to say. I mean, one has to rely on what he says himself. And interpret it as best one can. But I mean, he doesn't talk about no society. He doesn't talk about a sort of, an anarchic sort of state in which no one has any power. I mean, he talks about better society, and he talks about good governance. And whether WikiLeaks itself is sort of best placed to sort of be an example of that kind of democratic control, I don't know. But I think his politics are informed by injustices he saw in the past. And I think matching it with his particular skills, he just realised that that there was a way to hold the most powerful people to account, and that is a pretty fair achievement, really. But
it is, but with it goes a heavy responsibility, doesn't it?
I would say so, yes. I think journalists have learnt to live with sort of checks and balances to a certain extent. In some countries they manage it better than others. America, for all its sins, does actually very, very fiercely protect journalists' freedoms. But at the same time, they're quite strict with themselves. They have quite sort of clear codes of conduct. about how to operate. I think Australia is not that dissimilar from the States in that respect. I mean, there certainly is journalistic codes of ethics, and there are sort of ways of behaving which would be considered unacceptable and ways which aren't. But I think WikiLeaks is slightly sort of is a bit rudderless I don't think it's actually acknowledged that if you have the kind of power to, for example, expose the deep secrets of government, then you with it goes responsibility, and the responsibility has to be sort of within some kind of democratic framework.
Now, there's extraordinary forces ranged on Assange now, aren't there? I mean, it's such incredible forces that I find it hard to believe he's going to survive as a phenomenon himself. Would you share that belief, or do you think he will triumph in some way?
I mean, honestly, I think that really is in the lap of the gods, or if it's not in the lap of the gods, it's certainly in the lap of the courts. I think the trial is the trial about whether he's extradited to Sweden, and any subsequent trial after that is a massive sort of diversion, and none of us know how that would play out. And Assange himself has very wisely not spoken on it because it's a pending court case, so we can't either. I think the fact that he has fallen out with quite a few of his own colleagues is probably a problem for him. I mean, he, as you say, he's under enormous pressure, and I draw no conclusions from that. I mean, I don't think it's up to us to sort of sit here psychoanalyzing the man. But he has lost friends that he needs, I suppose, is one way of putting that.
So is the genie out of the bottle? I mean, whether Assange rises or falls, will there always be a WikiLeaks, or is it stoppable?
No, I don't think it is stoppable. I mean, I think what he's achieved is he's speeded up a process which might have been due to come anyway, which is the new media, and just it forces people to be more open. I mean, governments can no longer lie in quite the way they could to their citizens. I mean, it's not entirely new media. I mean, if I could, just a tiny diversion to Daniel Ellsberg, because who released the Pentagon Papers, which did change the course of the Vietnam War. But in order to do that, I mean, I think he was really an exceptional man. I mean, apparently a quite awkward character too, but he was exceptional too. In order to release, I mean, thousands and thousands of pages of documents about the Vietnam War to expose, first Johnson's lies, and then Nixon's lies, and so and he was again working with the New York Times, which is the third time we've had to mention that paper's name, for which I apologise. I mean, there are many other papers. It's just that those examples have been there. So he had to do that, he had to hand copy, I can't remember, it's something like 17,000 documents. And of course he couldn't personally do it, so he had friends doing it. He raised money, sort of more or less by word of mouth. And all this can happen now much more quickly. So you have 250,000 diplomatic cables, and they're out there. I mean, they still need sifting and redacting, as they call it, and putting in context. But so the will of journalists has always been there. I mean, and the will of whistleblowers has always been there. But it's all speeded up now with the technology, which is sort of, as I say, it's very energising.
Much more doable. Now, should everything be out there? I mean, where is the boundary between secrecy and privacy?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very good question. I mean, one answer to it is that the more power you have, the more reasonable it is to expose your secrets. And, you know, if you're a government with great power and you're lying, then it's absolutely reasonable and rational to expose it. So that's one extreme. The other extreme is that what about private individuals, you know? So now, I mean, do I want my medical records sort of, for example, revealed? Not that anyone would be interested, but do I want them revealed? No, I don't. But between those two things, you know, there's quite a way to go. And Assange himself has really sort of been put under the limelight quite often on this question. And I think it's almost a sleight of hand, really, or a sleight of hand. It just sort of isn't fair. You know, you've exposed big government secrets, therefore we have the right to expose everything there is about you. And there was a wonderful example of that on the BBC's flagship morning news programme called the Today programme, when a very, very respected anchorman called John Humphreys had arranged an interview with him, and it was a few days after one of the major leaks, and so this should have been a heavy-duty political sort of interview. And I've actually got the transcript in this. I mean, I wrote about it in this book, and I'd love to read that bit.
Yeah, sure.
Is that all right, Margaret?
Yes, of course.
Yeah. In this chapter, I've just been in this section. I've just been talking about the illusion of secrecy and privacy, and I write, an unexpected illusion of secrecy and privacy came in John Humphrey's radio interview with Julian Assange. 4 days earlier, The Guardian had published a story based on leaked details of the police evidence of the rape allegation against Assange. It was a tough interview, which at first appeared to be about politics, until Humphrey raised this disclosure. Assange said he had not yet been charged and that the prosecution leak to the paper had been selective. So that, in a way, should have been the end of it. In other words, there's a possible prosecution for sexual assault charges pending. In other words, now move on to the real story. So Humphrey says, can't you see that it's a bit rum for you to be sitting there under these circumstances? You, Julian Assange, the Wikileaks man, who's become terribly famous, as has your organisation, for leaking material that other people don't want to see published. And here you are saying they've leaked something about me. So Assange says, not at all. We're an organisation that does not promote leaking. We're an organisation that promotes justice. You hardly discourage it when you print a couple of million private cables. And then Assange persists, that promotes justice through the mechanism of transparency in journalism. This is now public, says Humphreys. So I'm asking you the question, did you have sex with those women? So Assange, still trying to talk about the real story, says, it's a matter of public record as far as the courts are concerned, but I am not going to be exposing other people's private lives or my own more than is absolutely necessary. That is not what a gentleman does. That is why I have never criticised these women. So then you sort of think, well, now move on, John. And so he says, how many women have you slept with? So Assange says, that's a private business. Not only does a gentleman not tell, not only does a gentleman not like to talk about his private life, a gentleman certainly doesn't count. And which is quite sweet. I like his use of the word gentleman. And Humphreys says, how many? Without being specific. So, I'm sorry, it's such a sort of irresistible diversion, but
it's not a diversion, really. It goes to the heart of it, doesn't it? So Assange is referring to the notion of gentleman, which has all sorts of notions of honour and correct behaviour, and yet he's one of the most phenomenally disruptive individuals ever seen, surely.
Yes, I mean, that's also true. I mean, I suppose, to return to the sort of privacy-secrecy idea, I do think that however disruptive you are politically, that your private life's your private life. And then there are occasions on which these two things collide. I don't think that was one of them. I think the fact of a court case was interesting. Humphreys could have mentioned it. I think asking him how many women he slept with is absolutely unforgivable. And I think, so for example, of course, the Dominique Strauss-Kahn story has to be told. The fact that he's been arrested, we shouldn't jump to conclusions, but the fact that he's been arrested, it's not a private matter, it's a public matter. So, the boundaries are blurred, but they're not, But that's it, really.
And then at the same time as all this has been going on in the United Kingdom, you've had journalists hacking people's private telephones, haven't you?
Yeah, well, we have. I mean, yes, I understand that the papers are full today. I've seen it on the internet, but not on paper, of Kate Middleton herself, the new Duchess of Cambridge, having been had her phones hacked. And Tony Blair, I believe, also is believed to have had his phone hacked. I mean, this we were talking earlier about the law and whether journalists should abide by it, and in some circumstances should they not. But I mean, it seems to me that this is quite clearly a breach. It's very difficult to defend. I mean, a breach of the law is very difficult to defend. I mean, this is, it's a powerful newspaper group. I mean, I believe that who owns quite a few papers here, I think the Murdoch Press, doesn't it?
Just a couple.
So it's a very powerful newspaper group. It's a terrible story in some ways. It's been going on for many years. The police have completely failed to investigate it thoroughly. There are suggestions, which I think are quite well backed up, that the relationship between the papers and the police have been very close. But in a way it gets worse than that, because the former news editor of the particular paper where most of this hacking took place then went to Downing Street to become the Prime Minister's press secretary. He resigned when this latest bout of, the latest bout was about 18 months ago, of scandals broke. But, as a colleague of mine wrote at the time, when you've got these three powerful, one of the most powerful media magnates, the Metropolitan Police and Number 10 Downing Street involved in something, I think it becomes a sort of matter of really grave public concern. So,
well, indeed. Yes.
So, it produces some very interesting stories, Sienna Miller and now Kate Middleton. But it is a scandal that really it needs thorough exposure, I think. Yeah.
Yes. Now, I'm going to open it up to the floor for questions shortly. And the rules of questions are that if you put your hand up, I'll try and see you through the bright lights, and then wait for the microphone, please, before you start your question. There's a couple there. But just to finish, questions to you, Barbara. Is Julian Assange a good thing or a bad thing?
It probably depends who you are. For journalism, he's a good thing. For governments, he's a very threatening thing, and therefore is likely to continue to come under attack. But I think he's changed the landscape for journalists, and I think he's changed the political landscape in a very positive way, and that is simply that most people, many more people now believe that it is their right to hear the truth from their government than they did before, and that's a great achievement, I think.
Well, before I seek questions from you, I'll ask the question of the audience. Hands up those who think that Assange and Wikileaks is a good thing. Bad thing? Not sure?
50-50.
Yeah. Okay, well, overwhelmingly, the citizens here at least think it's a good thing. Okay, now I'll take questions from the floor. The lady in the third row back there, if you just wait for the microphone, and then...
Thank you very much. It's extremely interesting. But I was wondering about the other level, wondering what you think about, in order for Assange to produce this material, it's got to be leaked to him. He's not the person who actually does the searching or the burrowing. And of course, the way that young soldier has been treated, gives one pause. Do you think that this will encourage, that the release of this will encourage more people to delve for material to give him? And unless there are people who do this in increasing numbers, presumably, he won't have a role. His role is, semi-journalist to produce and edit, etc., this material.
I think that is an important question, and I'm never quite sure, talking about this, whether to mention the Bradley Manning case or not, because one of the things that
Bradley Manning being the man who's accused of being the source.
Yes, he's the alleged source. And WikiLeaks and Assange himself have been very scrupulous about saying nothing about this at all, because to the extent that he is believed, he's accused of being the source, it's because of something he's alleged to have said in a chat room. It's nothing to do with the security of the WikiLeaks site. This is a terrible sideline to the story, but it doesn't actually impinge on the integrity of the site. It's, No, I understand what you're saying, but I thought that you were concerned that whistleblowers always run risks. I mean, the point of WikiLeaks is to make that as safe as it possibly can. And so far it's succeeded. But whistleblowers always run risks. I mean, Daniel Ellsberg he had to go on the run. He had the biggest manhunt for him, I believe it was said, since the Lindbergh kidnapping. Whistleblowers are usually driven by a great sense of injustice themselves, and from what we know of Bradley Manning, that's what he is alleged to have said in the chat room.
Now there's another question back there.
Thanks. Hi. I happened to be in the United States when all this broke out. My memory was it was late November. I happened to be in the United States when this material came out. I think it was late November last year. And so I was listening to the media at that time and really hearing a very, very different reportage than we get here in Australia. I was at the time quite shocked they were mentioning treason, and Assange wasn't an American citizen anyway, so I don't understand why it's treasonous. But the language that was used by the media was vindictive in the extreme, as far as I could tell. And I just wondered what comments you might have about how he has been treated variously across the globe in terms of whether he's a hero or not. But he was very much seen to be a villain, as best I could tell at that time.
So the question is for some comments on how Assange has been treated by the media.
Some of the American statements by politicians, in fact, some of the statements by politicians in Australia, I think have been ill-advised. Certainly a jump to, a rush to sort of, the rush to judgment is the phrase, isn't it? Judging it before any kind of trial. There were calls for extrajudicial execution of him in the States, weren't there? As you say, as a traitor, even though he's not an American citizen. I was just going to say, I'd be quite pleased to hear what people thought about the Australian coverage. I thought Julia Gillard was ill-advised to sort of declare him guilty before there was any trial. But I would say that in England for quite a while before he was considered, I don't think it was considered to be a terrible thing at all. His behaviour later was, but...
Young man down here.
In late 2010, there was an interview with Julian Assange, and he said that he had a large file from Bank of America. Earlier this year, there was a file leaked on WikiLeaks, which was a PowerPoint presentation by two US security organizations being hired by Bank of America, saying potential ways to defuse WikiLeaks, to undermine them. And do you have any ideas on what the Bank of America scandal might be?
I wish I did. I think I rely on you to find that out. You obviously followed that very closely, and there's so much more to come out. That's, very interesting question. Thanks.
The gentleman there in the middle. I'm aware of you.
You mentioned the case of Dominic Strauss-Kahn. I've been rather shocked by that case, and in particular when you realise what a critical man he is in terms of world finance and the whole changes that are possibly needed in the IMF and his political position in France. But to me, that's completely turned the whole system round. I notice you've been very cautious in relation to Julian Assange with what we believe, I think, is the accepted journalistic thing that when a case is at the first stages of a case, the mere accusation isn't allowed to be the dominant thing, i.e. you're innocent until you're proved guilty.
Can you just bring it to a question?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
So the question is, are you worried, as I am, that the whole thing that the trial of Julian Assange brought out about the way the Americans can charge people under their old grand jury system has happened to Strauss-Kahn, and nobody or no media seems to have jumped to his defence on the journalistic ethics terms?
Yeah. Okay. Well, first of all, what you said in the middle there is absolutely right. We shouldn't rush to judgment before there's been a trial. And I don't think, I certainly didn't intend to do that with Dominic Strauss-Kahn. The point that illustrates is, I think, that if someone like him gets arrested, if someone like Julian Assange gets arrested, then that's a story. You don't judge it, but you can't. If you got arrested for some misdemeanour, it wouldn't be a story, but nor would it be right, however odd, however strange your behaviour was declared to be. It wouldn't be fair to make much of it, because you're a private individual, and so we should leave you to have your trial. But the fact that Dominic Strauss-Kahn is arrested is, of course, a story. Yeah.
The lady here.
The Bank of America made me think, do you really think that leaders are going to be better or different?
The question was, do you really think leaders are going to be better or different as a result, I gather, of WikiLeaks?
Yeah, not out of the goodness of their hearts, but simply because it's far more difficult to tell lies if you think that there's a very strong likelihood of your being found out. And this could well happen to banks too. If they believe that what they say is going to be exposed, then they'll be a bit more careful.
Okay, there's a lady just there, and then there's somebody right up the back towards the left there.
Hi, just a brief comment and a question. I think in relation to Dominic Strauss-Kahn, the allegations against him are much more violent than they are with Julian Assange. The Swedish rape laws are a little bit different. But my question is that if Julian Assange really does have an insurance policy as such of hidden files, given his ethics and his reasons for doing this, do you think he has an obligation to release them anyway?
Good question.
That is a very challenging question, and I think the person who has to answer it is him. I think that's a very good point. He has many times said that if you go too far with me, I've got stuff that you will make your toes curl, and I think he's called it the nuclear option, hasn't he? But I think you're completely right, and I think that question should be sent to Julian Assange.
It's a good question. Great. Now there's somebody right up the back there.
I'm curious, why is he taking so long for everything to come out, and what's going to prompt it to happen a little more quickly?
Do you mean the cables?
Yes, because you've mentioned there's only 5% that's been released. Yeah. There's obviously so much more. And when and why will the other 95%, if it ever does come out?
Well, I mean, I think this is. This goes back to the question of is he a journalist? I mean, he has accepted that you can't just dump information, which includes names of people who might be endangered. You do actually have to go through the process of sort of sifting this information, and it is steadily coming out. I mean, there was something recently about Canada, wasn't there? There's something about Australia too recently about governments lying about the Iraq War. So, I mean, it is gradually coming out, and it probably has more impact that way, but he's got a very small staff, and he's now cut off relations with some of the people who might have helped in this process of sifting. I'm not sure that you want 250,000 sort of diplomatic cables all at once, do you? I mean, wouldn't everything get lost?
It depends. No, there's a lady here and then a gentleman there.
We've been talking about the importance and the game-changing of the phenomena of WikiLeaks, but there is a danger, and I think it's quite a probable one, that misinformation and outright lies would be fed to WikiLeaks as whistleblowing, and with the hope that WikiLeaks would publish something like this, and then for that to be exposed as a fraud to the discreditment of something like WikiLeaks. How would that, if that did eventuate, change the game again? That's a danger that has been recognised in several statements made by them. I think that is a danger of a proliferation of sites such as the Wall Street Journal, that unless... first of all, with the WikiLeaks sort of team, particularly the original team, is very, 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 very technically skilled at sort of coding, decoding. They're not straightforward information dumps. It's not just like my putting some letters in the post to sort of telling a lot of lies. I mean, it also comes back to the question of if you put some fraudulent information into a newspaper, I mean, as we know, that which happens quite often, or things people might write for spite, all these kinds of things, then one of the most important journalist tasks is to verify, and that's another reason why the WikiLeaks is a journalist. I mean, to the extent that they do that. I mean, I've never worked with them, so I don't know, but I believe they do. Yeah.
Gentleman, yeah.
Yes, you mentioned the BBC interview. Have you heard the Stephen Colbert interview with Julian Assange that took place in July 2010?
I didn't hear it. I've heard of it. Tell us about it.
Do you know who Stephen Colbert is?
No.
The comedian on the Comedy Channel in the US.
It's a spoof
It
interview.
is, yeah.
Yes.
But Julian came across very well. But Colbert made the point that haven't you heard the term ignorance is bliss? And he made the point that maybe we don't want to know everything that's going on in the world. Maybe we don't want to know what's going on in nursing homes. Maybe we don't want to know what's going on in abattoirs around the place. I commend that interview to you. Have a look at it. It is really entertaining.
Yeah. No, I've heard it's entertaining.
Are there things that we would rather not know about?
Other things we'd rather not know? Well, I mean, I don't know. I suppose I think that most people want to know the truth. I mean, I really do believe...
And I have a vested interest in that, don't we, as journalists?
Well, I don't think anyone goes out... I mean, ignorance is bliss is quite nice, and I mean, but I don't think anybody sets out as they get up in the morning to sort of be fed a load of lies, do they? I think most people would say, I think if you're going to tell me something, on balance, I'd rather it was the truth.
Okay. We've got time for, I think, perhaps one or two more questions. Yes, there's somebody over there.
Good evening. If you can comment, could you give your opinion on the proceedings in English court, and particularly the prosecutor's behaviour, if I can call it behaviour? And the Swedish extradition.
The Swedish prosecutors' behaviour. The Swedish prosecutors' behaviour.
The English prosecutors, though.
It's a request for a comment on the English court proceedings, particularly the behaviour of the prosecution.
Okay, to be very brief about a quite technical matter, what's happening in the English courts at the moment is the courts are hearing an appeal by the Swedes for extradition under a European arrest warrant. And the warrant is being challenged by Assange's lawyers on the grounds that if he's extradited to Sweden, he won't have a fair trial. So that's what's being tested in the courts at the moment. Does that answer the question, or not quite?
That's fine. Okay. One more question, and then we'll have to close, I'm afraid. Or maybe there isn't one more question. Oh, yes, around the middle there. Yes.
Can you comment on the relationship between the Swedish government and the US? Is there a behind-the-scenes attempt to bring Assange to the US via Sweden, as far as you know?
I mean, it's an interesting question, and I should say hands up, I have no idea. It's certainly been mooted. There are connections between Swedish prosecutors and American politicians, but then I think in any country at all that you would probably find that such links. So I can't see that they're particularly sinister. If there is something sinister in it, then we don't know it yet. I've no reason to believe that there's that's a plot. That doesn't mean it's not, but I have no reason to believe it is.
Well, let's hope if it is, we find out. But that's as good a note as any to end on, I think. I'd ask you to thank Barbara and certainly recommend her essay to you in current issue of Griffith Review. I think there are copies up the back. There's copies up the back if you wish to buy it. Good luck, and thank you very much for being here tonight, Barbara.
Thank you very much.